Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
Some people are born to drive their own bus. They have an idiosyncrasy of outlook that makes building their own thing inevitable. When these people run into a problem that they find both annoying and ridiculous and decide to solve it, good things happen. Mick O'Dwyer is one of those people. Even before BIV started, the second check I ever wrote, and first real one, was into his company SwiftComply, and for good reason. He is a very serious entrepreneur in its most core sense. He's a taker of opportunities with, as you will hear, a clear attitude to risk, who delights in the wrestle of getting the thing done. As anyone who has met or shared a karaoke room with him will attest, he's also a great person to spend time with. The man could sell, and indeed has sold, Guinness to the Irish. Please enjoy my conversation with the excellent Mick O'Dwyer. Mick, it may not surprise you that I've been looking forward to this. How are you?
I'm good. And me also. It's good to see you.
Excellent. Well, it's really great to have you on. We've obviously known each other for quite a long time, and yours is one of the really outstanding stories of company building. So I wanted to start in a slightly different place than we usually do. I want to know when you decided that you wanted to drive the bus. When did you decide that you wanted to build your own thing? That entrepreneurship was it for Mick?
I kind of like my initial instinct as you asked that question, Tom, right, is like, I'm not sure if I decided or was the bus just it's like speed, right? The bus is running and someone has to grab the wheel, because I feel like that was...
I literally have a speed t-shirt upstairs.
There you go. Well, yeah. So like, I think, I had this compelling thing that the world needed a solution for the problem that at the time I was solving, which is slightly different now, right? Things evolve. But like, what I will say is I knew early that I wasn't really built to be a passenger, in the sense that I kind of struggled to fit in not driving the bus, or at least having a front row seat, I'd say, all through my career. So like my first ever real job, say, not part-time jobs, my first real job was in the Guinness factory, and I was like a junior person on a team, and I like within 6 weeks was like running the team effectively, not necessarily with my manager's permission, and running the meetings, and like, so like from that perspective, I probably wasn't really built to be a passenger, and there's pros and cons to that. I think, but as I said, in the case of SwiftComply, like the bus was leaving the station and had no driver, and I was like, well, I'm going to be the one to drive that bus, completely unqualified and full of hubris, and thought I was going to change the world. But here we are, I guess, almost 10 years later. So
it's so interesting. We're going to get into that exact pain point, but I'm really interested in the psychology of the person turning up at the Guinness factory, like the icon of icons, whatever, right? And the team that has probably been there for a long time. And within 6 weeks, you've kind of imposed yourself, like Jack Dorsey, like did. I don't know whether you know the stories about like Jack Dorsey when he first turned up at his first job, and he was just like, everyone just decided he was in charge, basically. So like, what does that psychology look like? How does it manifest? Because I'm sure it resonates with a few people who are listening to this.
I was young and opinionated and bullish. You could say I'm now old and opinionated and bullish, right? So I like, get a paint a picture. Like I was 20 years old, I'd say 21 maybe. I fresh out of college, didn't know what I was going to do, and somehow landed in a job. It wasn't a strategic thing. I was going to take the summer off and go to Australia, and I got this like temporary job in Guinness, and I was like, that sounds cool. And I came in.
What was it? Did you reply to an ad? Did you know someone?
No, a friend was just like, a friend's uncle was a recruiter and was like, hey, look, they're looking for people with your skills. And me and my buddy went in as a team of like, I think 8 graduates, and they were building a team. It was in the pilot plant of Guinness, and that's where they pilot like new drinks. And basically what they were doing is they were making this drink that was essentially a mixer to go with like Smirnoff vodka and or gin or whatever. And it was like very Celtic Tiger-esque, right? Where people in London were going to spend £5 on a mixer. So instead of like a 7-Up or a tonic or whatever, they were going to have this like crafted non-alcoholic drink, right? And it was Guinness's or Diageo's first ever non-alcoholic drink that they were self-producing, right? So little did you know that Muggins here was like carrying the sugar and like helping the people in the lab and like doing like producing this drink, right? Like kind of going through it. And it was quite intense in the sense of like there was intense deadlines in terms of with the ship product, right? Which is actually really good learning, by the way. Like even today in software, I'm like, ship product. You ship product, that's like a positive thing. And that's kind of like how I measure success in a lot of ways. Are we shipping? And if we're not shipping, why? But kind of stems like, it's a weird dot to draw back to Tom, but like back then we were shipping physical product, which was drinks, right? And what ended up happening is like in order to hit our, like we had a production line, in order to hit our goal, our production goals, we had to run for like 18 hours a day. So that means that we had to split between shifts. That meant that you needed a shift leader. And again, I was the one who was like, I'll lead the late shift. So I ended up like working crazy hours, like 4 a.m, kind of like go in the evening into the morning or go in early in the morning and then go
nights.
Crazy hours.
That's amazing.
Underpaid, but like just, so I was running a team and then running a team of like 4, say on a total team of 12 or something like that. And then running a team quickly for me became like running the weekly meetings and the production meetings and, and I probably didn't have the political awareness that wasn't going to endear me to my direct boss because I was essentially in chunks of his job and telling him he was doing it wrong and, like all the things, but I was just using practical experience to solve the problem at hand. And I stayed there. What I didn't know was that was kind of like the intake was kind of also an experiment that Diageo were running for their graduate program. So the idea was that they were going to hire a couple of graduates from that into their like brewery program where you learn to brew and stuff. And I was young and impressionable. I thought that's what I was going to do. Met my wife, my now wife, in that job as well.
No way.
Huge impact on my life. But what happened then, I obviously didn't end up staying there because we wouldn't be having this conversation on the fundamental molecule. About right when I joined and before I kind of got settled, I had submitted an application into the local council for an engineering position. I was a qualified engineer, didn't know what I wanted to do. My mom, who worked in the council in motor tax for like 40 odd years or almost 40 years, I guess. She took early retirement. She was like, this is the greatest job you can get in the world. Like you should apply for these jobs, like permanent, pensionable. And it wasn't really me, but I was like, you know what? I'll placate my mother and like, a good remember for. That's how I ended up with water, by the way. My mom said apply for this job.
Solid tactics in general, I think.
Yeah. So I did. And then ended up getting offered a job around the time around like kind of sometimes between 6 months and a year in Diageo or Guinness. And it was like, all right, what do I actually want to do? And I was like, well, Diageo is cool and fun, but I didn't see myself actually brewing Guinness for 40 odd years. And I was like, I'll do this other thing and see where that goes. And accepted the job with Dublin City Council and started in like January 2005.
So bridge us to your recognition of the pain point of what would eventually be SwiftComply. What was the light bulb moment when it was like, well, this is actually ridiculous. There needs to be a much, much better way of solving the thing that you saw in the council, because it's the discovery of the pain, which I think is always such an interesting part of this kind of entrepreneurial genesis. Like, how did you walk into the thing that then leads you to say, well, this is crazy that people just have to deal with it?
I was in the council for 9 years in total. And like, I think around about year 5, I stayed in Wastewater. Normally they do a rotation, right, with graduates. Funny story is like, initially I was like, oh, I got assigned to the wastewater department. I'm like, I'm not sure that's for me, but sure, I'll go with it. And I went down to the wastewater treatment plant.
Not the glamour role that you were expecting.
It was not the glamour role coming from Diageo that I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. It was kind of interesting and funny. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to roll with it. Went down to the wastewater treatment plant and I fell in love with wastewater treatment. I fell in love with the people in the plant, actually. Like, they're just like, these men who are 40 years older than me that had been like literally in the trenches, like through that, and had seen this evolution to this like really sophisticated wastewater treatment plant. As you know, like super interesting science. So I fell in love with that. And so when they asked me to move from wastewater over to like the traffic division, I was like, hell no, I'm not leaving. No, I was like, I'm not leaving. Like, but actually it turned out that a lot of people had this kind of bias against the wastewater treatment plant. So they were quite happy to leave me there for a while and like do my kind of graduate program there. And I was like, and I was quite happy to be there. So I did that, and I kind of had a remit over the pumping stations and the wastewater treatment plant. And that was when I first touched kind of compliance, right? Like I was there, like working with the sampling team on the effluent and so forth, and kind of just kind of really experienced that. Fat oil and grease was a problem in the pumping station network. So in Dublin, there was like 42, 43 pumping stations, and we had like I was constantly dealing with this problem where clogged pumps, and it was like 80% of the time was fat oil and grease. And I got asked to, the city was trying to run a program to solve this problem because there was a problem in the network as well. I got asked to come in and take over the project. It was a bit politically sensitive, and it was going a little bit sideways with the management that they had in there. So I said, sure, this seems like an opportunity that I can get behind. And like at that point, I was like, I'd seen the problem, right, in the manifest itself at the inlet works, but also mainly in the pumping station. And I was like, all right, I can solve this. And the kind of there's got to be a better way moment was like I walked into my new office, which was in head office, and there was a room with 25 filing cabinets, you know, those old kind of filing cabinets with like 4 or 5 drawers and fireproof because it's all very official. 25 filing cabinets filled with paperwork, like permits and inspection forms and sampling report forms. And I'm like, what's this? And it's like, that was my job. It was like, this was like the universe of, and there was only at the time, like something like 800 restaurants being like regulated under the FOG program. And like out of 4,000, right? Like, so it was like, it was a failing program, but yet we had this room, and like, not a small storage room, like a room that would sit about 12 to 16 people if it was an office, full of like paper. And I was like, and people whose job it was just to take paper in and file it without actually looking at the paper and actually like affecting any change. And I worked out at the time, like the part of my, and you know, as I said, I'm not a passenger. So I was like, this is ridiculous. And I worked out that there was almost 200,000 pieces of paper every year being generated by this ineffective program, but yet they had less than 20% compliance. All they were doing was swimming in paperwork. All they were doing was like passing paper around and not actually in the fields doing work.
None of the pieces that actually did anything, they just existed.
Yeah. So then I was like, right, well, we're going to change that. And I enlisted a friend in the IT department. He's a friend now. I guess at the time I was probably just this pushy engineer who was like, I need something. So we built like a Microsoft Access database that was going to be, that I could access through an FTP site. So it felt like it was online for people in the field. It was clunky as hell. No budget, right? Like
MVP.
Paper budget was sky high, but our actual technology budget was zero. We built what was ultimately, I guess you would call like V0.1 of what became SwiftComply. We built a simple tracking system, and I made the revolutionary decision that we were not going to mail everything automatically and that we were going to default to email, which was like unheard of at that time. And honestly, this was, you know, like probably before GDPR, which probably was an enabler for me, because right now I probably wouldn't be allowed to do that. But so I was like, we're collecting emails, it's mandatory emails, and just went about reducing the paperwork. And yeah, set about running that program and did that for 4 years. So that was the first phase. And then through, I suppose, life happens, things happen. In my case, the national water utility, Irish Water, was established coming out of kind of like the financial crisis. And they were like, oh, that's an interesting project. And there was revenue, right? So we were charging like permit fees and like disposal fees for FOG, and I didn't realize this, but it turns out I was reasonably commercially minded. I set the program up to be like budget neutral for the city. I had a whole formula that I used to calculate what that would be, and what, you know, like I kind of like, it was actually kind of cool looking back on it. Now that I look back on it, I'm like, yeah, that was actually kind of like a successful project. So Irish Water came along and said, hey, we want to do this nationwide. And I said, sure. Basically, like without going into the details, we couldn't reach a financial agreement. And what that means is they wanted me to do it for 50% pay cut. And I was like, I'm not doing it.
That's the interesting style of negotiation.
Yeah. There was like, I was acting grades above my position, my actual underlying grade, because there was a hiring freeze during this whole financial crisis and they were unable to pay acting essentially, right? Like that was it wasn't that they were like, you got to do this that way, but the story's better when I say it that way. So anyway, but then I decided that, the best thing to do here is a clean break and do something different. And I took 3 months to go off to South America with my now wife, at the time girlfriend. And I also at this point learned about the bus factor, and I came back to absolute chaos and please come back. We'll pay. What do you want us to pay you? Because nobody knew how the program worked and everything kind of grinded to a halt, right? So there was like a bus factor of 1 and I was the bus driver, I guess, right? To back on the start. So, and I'd taken this kind of sabbatical that you were allowed to take. And I was like, what am I going to do next? And was kind of like a little bit disenchanted with the process and what was I going to do, and probably stubborn. And I decided that I would talk to them and see what they would pay me as a contractor or consultant to like fix their inherited problems. And they paid me quite well. So that became a company, basically, enough to become a company where I went in to fix their problems for 6 months while I was on sabbatical to, hey, they just employed me and I ended up director of a small environmental services company. Weirdly, right? Like kind of not by design or intent, just by opportunistic happenstance and kind of regulatory change, I guess you'd say in some respects, or system change, right? Like in terms of that. So worked as essentially a contractor or a consultant. Team grew to like 12 or 15 people. And I had then I was employing like people to go out and do inspections of restaurants for the Follow and Grease program across mainly the Dublin region. And my initial Microsoft Access database wasn't going to cut it. So I was like, you know what? I can build a tool, and if I make it more efficient, like it's going to hit my bottom line. So that was actually where SwiftComply was born, was in the, I now have a problem where I have to run this bigger program with like constrained resources and actually solve that. So that was version 1 of what became SwiftComply. I'm not even sure what I called it back then, just a system or something like that. So
interesting. So in light of that, because it's such an interesting evolution of an idea into something practical that's delivering the value that you understood unbelievably well, because you could not have been closer to the problem. But the initial scope of what you were doing was, right, I'll just solve it for this lot.
Yeah, solve my own problem, basically.
Describe to us how you felt the aperture opening. What was your thought process in understanding that this was something that was not just Irish water? This was potentially, literally all over the world. What I'm trying to get at is this transition from, we're going to solve this problem for Irish water after the financial crisis, into something that ends up becoming like, a venture-backed company, you move to the US, etc. But it's the psychology of it.
So you have to remember, like, this is 2015, 2016. Like I started the company in 2016. So this is like leading up to that. Uber is just becoming a thing. And I say Uber because the embarrassing story is like my first pitch for what was SwiftComply was like, we are Uber for grease trap pump outs. Like I had this vision where the whole system was connected and you just go to an app and like anyone in venture at the time was like, there's an Uber for everything, right? Like that was kind of what was happening.
But I do feel like you won. In terms of Uber for X.
I know.
You won.
I know. The embarrassing thing is I still like the first solution we built that was our Uber for X was so beautiful and elegant, and like about 10 years before the market was ready for anything like that. And actually what the market needed was just like a platform to manage data in a consistent way with modern tools. And took me an embarrassingly long time to figure that out because, you kind of get tied up in your own vision a little bit. But to go back to your question, I was running a services business, about 15 people. So I had all the kind of like ups and downs of that. And at the same time, I went and did an MBA, an executive MBA in Smurfit Business School in Dublin. And I joined the entrepreneurship club. I've clearly had an interest in entrepreneurship, and the club, there's some great guys in the club. Like the guy who kind of brought me in under his wing. I ended up becoming the chair of the entrepreneurship club because again, I'm not a passenger, right? But he was the outgoing chair. Like he just sold his business for like 400 million, like tech business. So like these were people that I was mixing with. Des Traynor, the founder of Intercom, came in and like talked to us, so it was just like very like high caliber speakers in a room of like maybe 15 people. And I was looking around going, why is like the whole year here? Like I was like, this is credible. And like I tell people what I learned in my MBA was like, I wanted to build a product company and not a services company. And I think the advantage I actually had was starting in Irish water. This is kind of to loop it back to your question, right? Like starting in Ireland's a small country, like 5 million people. Irish water, like there was one customer for what I was doing. I reached this understanding that if I wanted to grow, I had to leave the island. And the option there is like, you either leave the island by going to the UK or you go to the US. From a pure language and ease and connectivity standpoint, that's actually easier than going to Europe. Even though I tried to boil the ocean and do everything, but like, that was kind of like a clear decision for me. So I then was like, that was happening. And while that was happening, the other eureka moment I had is I heard there was a fat oil and grease conference in Washington, DC. And I'd never been to Washington, and I'd never been to a fat oil and grease conference. But you have to remember, like, I was the one guy in the whole of Ireland who knew how to like set and run this program and rules and deal.
There are more of me.
And yeah. And it was like bizarre to go into a room and it's like, have like whatever, 40 people who all had the same problems. And, you know, so I was like, I'm going to that. And what happened there was actually quite magical in the sense that, and, you know, that's like, there's, you know, these moments in history, like whatever, that, when you look back. But what was magical was like, I got it because I was traveling from Ireland and I was the only person not from the US. They offered me a speaking slot. I did a presentation of like just fat oil and grease in Dublin. But what I did was like, my last 3 slides were like about the work, how I managed the workflow. So I was like, maybe this will be interesting. And this is like, you know, I'm kind of thinking maybe there's a product here. So I did that in because a very no sales pitch type way, right? Conferences. So I did that. And like at the end of my presentation, everyone's hand shut up. And the first question everyone asks is like, what software are you using? What's that? How did you do that? And I was like, well, this is something I built. And I ended up, my 30-minute presentation became like an hour and a half walkthrough of the product. And then, you know, one of the things I'm good at is the social side of selling, not the like rigor of following up and all the rest. So we all went out for a pint and a conversation and then an Irish whiskey. And like, I left that conference with like 5 letters of intent to buy software that was not built for commercial, was built for like a very specific use case. And I was just like riding that wave, came back to Ireland and was like, right, I am going to quit my job, go and this is the company. Like, this is why I was put on this, is to solve this problem for this customer set. So then I set about doing that. And that was kind of like 2016 was like, we're building fog software. Still a little sprinkling of Uber coming into here. Like, it was all connected system, but like ultimately fundamentally it was like fog software for water and wastewater, well, wastewater utilities or fog program managers.
How did you think about the move to the West Coast for that period of time? As you reflect on that, because it's obviously you moved into the sort of cradle of startup building, and I found it to be an amazing experience. I'm always curious as to people who went there from somewhere else and have now left about how they reflect on their experience in the area of California.
It was amazing. And it was absolutely the right decision for me at that time and my family. Like, so I did Techstars in London. So I was like, I needed funding. And I was like, okay, I've decided I want to build a product. I know nothing about building a technology company. I barely know about building a services company, right? Like, so I was self-aware enough to know that there was ways to learn this that were going to be faster and more efficient. And especially like the raising money part, I was like, I need to raise some capital to build Uber for fog. So I was like, I went to Techstars and I did that kind of intensive 3-month accelerator. Like, I raised $1 million. But while I was there and I was like, you know, I was flying back and forth to the US, enormous strain on family, like whether I was in London or the US, like Rosalie, my wife was still in Ireland. And I was like, okay, I got to move to the US. And I was like, you know, Boston, New York, maybe Chicago. I was like, where will I go? And I was talking to like some investors and I came to the realization that everyone says, oh, there's like 6 people working on the same idea at any one time. And it's, you know, like it's not as unique or special. And like, maybe that's not true in all cases, but like I was building like workflow software, right? Like, it's not, you know, like people do it. Like, you know, I didn't believe I was some genius. And I went one turn further on that. And I was like, well, if that's the case, there's like a pool of capital in the universe that would fund a business like fog compliance software, fat oil and grease compliance software. And the majority of that capital is likely to be in Silicon Valley because that's where the majority of capital was. And I was like, well, the chances of acquiring a chunk of that capital, if you're in Silicon Valley, it goes up exponentially versus trying to raise that now. And you have to remember, this is before COVID. This is when a lot of it's done in person, a lot of like, you know, it's there. And I kind of went and I was like, right, we're going to the US and we're going to California, which turns out was an easy enough sell to Rosalie and Sophie Rose to a lesser extent.
Exactly. An unbelievable amount of sunshine.
Yeah. Yeah. So we got on the plane, like kind of burned the boats, off we went. And like that, you know, that manifested to be true. I'd say like being in the right place manifests to be true, and that like we were able to raise like a round like quickly, and like probably, like we did the Imagine H2O thing, and even like, even through connecting with, you guys at Burnt Island Ventures and stuff like that, like that all like cycles from that kind of being in that ecosystem. I wouldn't say we got all the capital or much of the capital, or maybe, and like there's good companies that raise capital in other markets. But coming from Ireland, I think that was where I had no network. You have to really remember, like that was the right place to be in terms of culture and people, and would absolutely do again. Even though it is wildly expensive, this is all about perspective. It was the right thing.
It's so interesting to think about it. And I think there's a lot in there for people to take away. I love that idea of the kind of probabilistic thinking, is that there is just a fixed amount of capital where you're most likely to be able to get access to it, as well as the kind of the nuts and bolts of obviously kind of like company building, learning all that side of things. Were you struck by the kind of this classic idea that everybody is sort of there to do their thing that is, I mean, a lot of people are there to be PMs at Dropbox or whatever. That's fine. But the fundamental attitude of, yeah, you're building that thing, that's great. And anybody it feels a little bit like if you're not building something, it's a question of like when, not if. I've always been so struck about that ethos.
That's actually a really good question. I haven't spent much time reflecting on this, although I will say, like, I didn't love the founder events in the Bay Area. I found like there was a lot of noise and a lot of whiplash and a lot of crazy things, to the point I'll say, like, when I went to like WefTech for the first time and kind of connected with that community, it was like, oh, these are my people. Like, this is where I'm supposed to be, not the like founder who's building some app for some marketing optimization that I like was way above my head, or I'm just like, maybe it's because I'm a non-technical founder, but I never really clicked. And there's a lot of people talking, and the people that are doing it are hard to meet. I spent the first year kind of on event circuit and I pitching and that sort of stuff. And I kind of quickly moved away from it once I kind of realized that I actually enjoyed talking to customers. I enjoyed talking to other water nerds. But what I did do is like the network effect from an investment standpoint was incredible, where you get like, one angel investor would unlock a $3 million round in like 4 days. And when you're coming from Ireland, where everything is like takes months and months and months, if not years, my mind was blown, like blown at the speed and the optimism and just the anything is possible, and this notion that like investing in the future and creating the future was what really appealed to me in the Bay Area. And that kind of thinking is probably what I would say is a takeaway. And even as I come back I'm back in Ireland now, right? I'm dipping my toe in the events and probably a little bit more, with more gray hairs in my beard because I've no hair left on my head and all the rest. And I'm like, yeah, the mindset shift, you don't realize it's happening until you look back, because I see it now. Probably the same pond that I was swimming in that's small. Even though you think it's the biggest pond in the world, like I'm like, oh no, like I kind of feel obligated to try and help people break out of that. And not obligated is the wrong word, but like some joy from just kind of helping people that.
Exactly. That you understand the benefits of the mindset shift. And if you can pass that on, then that's great. The final sort of step of this through line, how do you reflect on how the quality of the infrastructure and actual like practicing of entrepreneurship in Europe has improved since you started?
It's improved leaps and bounds, certainly in Ireland, the Irish context, right? Because that's where most of my experience would be. There's just a lot of good programs and supports. And I think also the advantage now is remote working is much more accepted. Like when I started selling, like I had to fly to every city and go and like sign, I was selling probably too cheaply, but like I was spending my first year's revenue on the initial meeting, and then I had to go and like, it was unsustainable. Whereas now, like I see there's a lot more connectivity in the world. There's a lot more done from on Zoom or other.
Exactly. Culture's changed.
So from that perspective, it makes it easier to kind of like build from anywhere. And that's perfectly rationally disabled. Does the advice hold true of like going and like occupying the space? Maybe, I don't know. Like I'm not out there right now. I think there's also like places like Techstars and YC and, they've open sourced a lot of their content and material in terms of like videos. There's podcasts like Cason that you can go and do that. Like none of that existed 10 years ago, which is kind of crazy to me. Like, and now I'm like, listening to a podcast most days, and you're just kind of doing like that kind of learning is faster and easier. You've got the AI angle, which we haven't even touched on as well, where you can effectively have a startup co-founder that's AI that you can bounce every idea off and get kind of contextual, like it's a good question. I don't know if this is a good answer, but it's like, yeah, I think Europe is really interesting now. There's still the cultural thing of like all these different countries. That's hard to, and the European Union is doing its best, and there's like the Horizon 2020 program and funding programs and stuff like that. But if I'm in certainly Britain and Ireland, I'm probably turning my attention to the US rather than the mainland Europe, so to speak. If I'm scaling a business today, I'm starting again today. Mainly it's the localization requirements and the business culture and just the rules and regulations and the size of the market, right? Like it's willingness to buy.
It's very interesting. You've given us the perfect segue into going into the kind of company building side of things. And let's actually just begin at the end. Like, how are you incorporating AI into what you're building now?
We've two lenses, like there's the internal perspective and the external perspective. So what we did was we avoided the shiny object chasing that some people do, because we weren't sure what our customers would feel about like AI. This is bearing in mind that, Tilly started adopting cloud maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. Like kind of COVID was a big like dam break for cloud infrastructure, so I was quite hesitant around like pushing nascent technology into like what is ultimately like sensitive data. What we started doing was internally looking at where can we say, like, what are the repeatable tasks that we're doing? Where can we save like 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes a task gradually? How do we get everyone consistent? So things like when we use ChatGPT a lot, like we've enterprise subscriptions to ChatGPT. We use that quite a bit. Just helps for training and customer support, get the answer straight away, hooked up to knowledge base, little things like that. Now we're in the interesting phase where we're starting to tune things for the customer side, but it's really interesting because it's like, it's not a chat bot that they want. It's like an analyzing data over periods of time. And we've done, without going too into the weeds, we've layered a data lake with an LLM that's trained, contextually aware, that we're able to interrogate, that it kind of loads it like almost real time, and essentially key tasks. So we validate backflow testers. That's kind of one use case where AI is quite good at validating and detecting fraud, similar to financial institutions, right? Like, so like little things like that. Analysis and reporting is a big one. And then some smart permitting and predictive text type things built in. So like, but again, same philosophy. Where can we save our user 5 minutes a day? Like we had one customer, they're large, and we did one tweak for their instance, and they're like, you've just saved us $50,000 in time a year. And it took like, we're like, oh, we probably should have charged for that.
Exactly.
Like,
don't tell me that now.
Yeah, no, but I mean, we'll get a case study out of them, and there's always the balance there. I would say we're probably early or behind, certainly mainstream wise, we're behind. We're trying to pace it with the market, right? Like, and try to be very thoughtful about it. I'm very excited about it, but I think that's just part of my DNA, is just like, what more could we do? I have a really strong product and engineering team that are very like balancing customer needs and satisfaction with like future focused features and kind of like bringing that all together. So
exactly. You mentioned right at the top of this, the idea of like shipping product and the maintenance of that kind of velocity and keeping your proverbial quick. Having that as a key part of the DNA, which I know you do, is inherently hard to maintain as you get bigger. How do you keep that quick? And if you can like layer in the importance of kind of the connection to the customer, because if there's any founder superpower that I would choose for you, that's yours, and inculcating it in the rest of the company.
I'd say we fail a lot at this as we grew. We acquired a company probably when we were too small to acquire a company.
Yeah. A bit on that story would be super helpful. Yeah.
So I would say we lost our way a little bit, actually, if I'm being totally honest, in terms of like, we slowed down, like shipping ground to a halt, and we had too many customers to be able to, and we tried to please them all. I would say my journey, SwiftComply's journey, has been really interesting to kind of go like full cycle, because we like nearly failed by indigestion, which shouldn't really be possible to do, but that's basically what we did. And we kind of had real struggles trying to like be everything for everyone. And
just to be clear, like the acquisition suddenly gave you so many customers
at a new market, well, within the water market, but a new what we call a module in our software. I'll tell a little bit of that story first, and then I'll talk about like the shipping. We around about 2018. So I'd raised some money, moved to the US, was building the business, had kind of building out the sales process, founder-led sales, couple of engineers, like maybe like 7 or 8 people. I'm not really sure. A couple of 100,000 in revenue. Like, and I had that kind of blunt realism that this was not growing quickly enough and I was going to run out of cash. So had a real difficult introspection moment where I was like, this business is going to fail. In doing that was like, what do I do? And I ended up, long story short, I ended up figuring out that, oh, well, there was a couple of legacy providers of software to water utilities in compliance in my space. I was like, maybe I could buy one of those. I wonder what that would look like. And went and met a couple and had some conversations. And there was one, I was quite fortunate. There was another company who actually approached me about acquiring SwiftComply. I was doing a kind of little roll up that was essentially like, to use the Jeremy Clarkson, like they were kind of drilling the field and like plowing the field, I suppose, like bringing up soil, right? So like there was kind of activity in the market. And anyway, long story short, I bought one. It was like small business, 5 people, lots of customers, like lots of like customers that they were undercharging from. But like, sorry, I said it was a small business. They were like probably 3 times the size of my business at the time, right? Like, but kind of, 30-year-old software business on legacy tech that everyone that had previously talked to them about acquiring them was afraid to touch because no one, like it was like, this was like, when Microsoft was being created, there was a few other operating systems that were around and one was called 4D out of France. And the founder of this company decided that, nah, I'm not going to back the Microsoft horse that everyone else in the whole world was backing. And he decided to back this technology, which is crazy. And he built everything himself, like every line of code written himself. And he built a business, primarily backflow compliance business, good business, just a little like, husband and wife and a couple of staff. I was lucky. They were in Northern California. They were like 40-minute drive from where I lived, early, like random, obviously. And he was ready to sell. And I'd met him at conferences because I was on the conference circuit and I was ready to buy. And the ridiculous part of this story, which is we bought that business for just over $2 million with less than 500 grand in the bank. And don't ask me how that actually came together, but that was the risk appetite at that time, Tom, which is kind of like, I would put a caution if, do not do this at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
It's an interesting case indeed.
I went both feet all in. I was like, I'm going to figure this out. And I had a lot of conviction about the mission though. So we did that. What I learned a lot there. But like, what I will say is like the kind of the biggest takeaway, we tried to be all things for all customers. And we were, we had to end the life that product because we couldn't support it long term and we had to transition them. And there's an interesting anecdote that I heard recently, which kind of crystallized things for me, which is like Ford Motor Company is like, its customer satisfaction rating was quite low and they were spending millions trying to improve their customer satisfaction rating. And they were like, they just couldn't, right? And then some smart person realized that the reason that it was so low was because Ford was the biggest provider of fleet cars in America. And when you remove the choice of what vehicle you drive, your satisfaction inherently decreases because you didn't have a choice. You have to drive this truck or you have to drive this.
Right.
So they segmented the customer cohort to go customer satisfaction among new buyers of the car versus fleet drivers of the car. And it was like chalk and cheese, right? Like the new buyers were sky high customer satisfaction fleet. And I was like, that's a little bit like SwiftComply, where we tried to replace a 30-year-old system that had been built, like had so many skeletons in the closet and so many custom things built that don't work. And we basically, our customers felt forced because we end of life this. We basically were starting from a place where they were never going to be truly satisfied. But like I spent years, sleepless nights trying to figure out why, like what was happening with these customers. And now I realized actually I need to focus on my ICP, my ideal customer profile. I need to focus on the problems that we actually want to solve and be the best in the world at. If that means that some customers have to go to other solutions, then they should go. It's the best for them and it's the best for us.
Absolutely.
Friction.
Yeah.
I'd say, Tom, like 2 years, maybe more, like maybe 3 years, it's like wrestling with this underlying friction. And I suppose to answer your question, like probably by meeting all the customers where they are, I probably realized that, but it was not easy. Like it was like when people say, oh, 80% of acquisitions or mergers and acquisitions fail, like this is probably a big part of the reason why, in my opinion. And
oh, interesting.
probably if I hadn't bet the house, so to speak, on this transaction, it probably would have failed. But I was just like sheer will that wasn't going to allow it to, which is probably too detailed. And then back to your shipping point, while I was doing all that, we actually, I wouldn't say stop shipping, but we didn't ship enough, quickly enough, or at a high enough quality bar. And that all changed 2 years ago, where we brought in, and he's now our CTO, but brought in a new head of product who had just had this super smart guy, had built a company, sold it to Dropbox, had gone into another unicorn company, and he kind of came in. I was like, remember our first conversation, I was like, we just can't seem to ship the way we used to when we were like 2 engineers and me around a table.
Yeah.
You know, those are fun, romantic days of like building.
Exactly. The halcyon days.
I was like, how do I want that back? And he was like, all right, we're going to ship. Like, and it's harder when you've got, you know, I think we've 571 customers now. And, you know, like it's harder when you've got those large customers. And, you know, he has distilled that culture incredibly, like way beyond what we ever shipped before, to the point now where it's just like we're now have multiple teams shipping simultaneously. And it's just a joy. Like I love every Thursday. It's just like, here's what we ship, you know, and I'm like,
oh, good.
Magical, you know? So I would do things differently, obviously, but like it was finding that right person to come in and actually bring back that piece of our DNA that we'd kind of lost was transformational for me.
Absolutely. Which is a good segue. I just like, you're in a really interesting position now. So say a bit about where you find yourself. What's the current kind of status of the business, and just a little bit about what's on your mind and kind of what's next as you continue to build this platform.
It's been an interesting 6 months, I suppose. We did a growth round. So growth fund out of Boston called M33 Growth. I've been talking to them for a couple of years. I'm going to fundraise, and we ended up last year agreeing to do a majority growth financing. So they bought a majority stake in the business. They bought out many of our earliest investors who all got a return, which was great.
Absolutely.
So liquidity event for shareholders and new owner with strong thesis on water, building out the platform and kind of taking what we had built, but also really strong muscle around scaling a business. So of like kind of like our size to kind of meaningful scale. And for me personally, it's been really interesting because it's a huge change, right? Like we now, you know, our team has grown quite significantly. We did another acquisition a couple of months ago. So like kind of hot on the heels of the investment announcement. And I think what they've been really good at is just like helping me focus on what I'm good at, and also bringing in people who are like world-class to focus on the other areas that maybe like we were under-resourced or had the wrong person in the wrong seat, and really bring that rigor and discipline into like building the company for the next phase. And I think we might have talked about this offline the last time I saw you. It's simple things, but like my thoughts are no longer occupied on like, will I make payroll next month? And they're now occupied on like, okay, how am I going to solve this problem over the next 18 months so that I can do the next thing? And like really just thinking about that whole platform and that growth strategy on a 5-year horizon, which is
so helpful.
Oh, it's liberating. It's been, you know, I wouldn't say like anything, you know, for me personally, I was in the weeds too much in many areas, like as probably many founders are. I had to extract myself from that and had the trauma of giving up things.
Loss aversion is tough.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had it in that middle of your brain.
And I didn't realize until they told me, but like, you know, I don't run the payroll anymore, which I was running up until January of this year. Like I was the one who had.
That might be one where loss aversion is less.
I know. Like it's just one of those ones where it manifests as like, oh, that just, there's systems now. And it just happens that it would have like, you know, the point of failure. And for a while, it was a little bit, I felt orbital, right? Because as people are doing their job, you're trying not to step on their toes, but you also want to feel productive and effective. And a lot of people, when you don't know what to do, you can default to like some manual task that maybe isn't the right thing, like running payroll or whatever. You don't need the CEO of the company to be the one running payroll. But the point is like, I could accomplish that and I could do it with success. And when you're building a company, sometimes those moments are things that you cling to because there's so much stuff that's failing or going wrong. And
yeah, it's the reward.
It's that mindset a little bit. And it took me a while, but now it's great because I'm, you know, I've got a really strong team around me, still hiring, you know, and like building a platform and kind of building a place where other businesses like SwiftComply that could potentially fit into our overall thesis could actually join that mission where there's kind of like a stronger together piece. And having some really interesting conversations in that space. And yeah, just excited by the possibilities. And I think we're 55 people, kind of growing steadily, adding a couple of people every month. And it's been really interesting and fun, dare I say it.
Well, like I said it at the top, and I've said it to you a lot, maybe not enough, but I've said it to you a lot. You are such an extraordinary archetype for how we think of everything from the power of founder market fit, entrepreneurial process, but also really this kind of, like, as you said, with that acquisition, that entrepreneurship is kind of the science of informed sequential risk taking. And I think so many times during my job, I think about the sequence of informed risks that you took that have led you to where you are. And I couldn't have more congratulations for you. It's been such a pleasure to watch you work for this amount of time. It's been quite a long time now.
Yeah, it's growing. Thanks.
Weird, eh?
Oh, I appreciate it. And thanks to you too as well. Obviously, you've been a great supporter and partner over, I think we first met in 2019, I guess.
That's right.
Around the time we were doing that acquisition, actually. But yeah, what did you say?
Yeah.
Formed sequential risk. Is that what you said? I kind of like that, actually.
Yeah. No, it's just like everything's risky. It's just, where's that? Oh, cool, let's go there.
I do have a core belief that people overestimate the downside of risk. That's kind of just a belief that I have. And probably one of the things I'm good at is actually being objective, or maybe a little bit too optimistic, one turn too optimistic in the sense of like decisions. But like Rosalie always says, like, she feels like I walk towards the riskiest thing. Like, she doesn't understand why, like, cause she's kind of the opposite to me. So she's like, there's a fork in the road, and one is like a nice safe path, and the other one is like treacherous. And
yeah, exactly.
That's interesting,
Interesting and fun.
Yeah. Informed sequential risk. I like that. I might use that.
Well, I use enough of your stuff, so you're welcome to it. You're not free yet. Our final question we ask all of our guests on the Fundamental Molecule: if you had to choose one piece of advice for current and future water entrepreneurs, what would it be?
One of the objections I ran into, like, is the size of the niche. It's not a big enough market. And I think, like, in infrastructure or a market like water, I actually believe a niche is a mirage. And I think I have a reason for this, right? If it's mandated, so we're regulatory compliance, you don't get more mandatory than that. If it's recurring and operationally painful, so mandated, recurring, operationally painful, it's probably worth a lot more than it looks on the surface. And I think actually you've been someone who kind of recognized that probably early, like, right, in terms of Burnt Island Ventures and investment thesis, but that's not always obvious, and can be disheartening. It can be disheartening to get no's from investors who don't really understand. So
who don't take it as seriously as they should.
Like, so actually, I'm going to change that to an anecdote, which is like, good investors invest in traction and great investors invest in the future. So you just have to show find the great investors and then show them how water actually works. And like, mandated, recurring, operationally painful, and they will actually get it. And I was fortunate enough to have great investors on the journey that actually like funded the solution for our customers, right? Which wouldn't exist today. So that was a really long answer though.
No, we may have found the title for our episode, which is mandated, recurring, and operationally painful. And I don't know whether that fully overlaps with going for a drink with me. It might not be mandated.
Mandated, it is recurring, and it's operationally joyful. There you go.
That's not. Once it, mate, it's been exactly as much of a pleasure as I knew it would be. Thank you so much for coming on the Fundamental Molecule.
Cheers. Thanks, Tom.